The most dangerous person in any room is never the one shouting. It's not the one wearing the loudest watch, driving the fastest car, or sitting at the head of the table drinking the most expensive wine. No, the most dangerous person is the one who is watching, the one who is listening, the one everyone else has decided to ignore. In every family, there is a hierarchy. It is invisible, but it is as hard as concrete. At the top, you have the golden ones, the cousins who became doctors, the uncles who invested in real estate in the 90s, the aunts who married into old money. And at the bottom, you have the poor relative, the one who is invited out of pity, the one who sits at the corner of the table near the kitchen door, the one who wears a jacket that is slightly too big or slightly too old. Tonight, we are going to tell you the story of Arthur. To his family, Arthur was a ghost. He was a footnote, a cautionary tale of what happens when you lack ambition. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly see through the fog of their own arrogance, was that Arthur was unfailing. He was waiting. You see, there is a fatal psychological flaw in the minds of the wealthy and arrogant. It is called confirmation bias. Once they label you a loser, they filter out every piece of evidence that proves them wrong. They become blind to your potential because seeing your strength would force them to question their own superiority. And that blindness, that is where the trap is set. It happened on Christmas Eve, inside the sprawling estate of Uncle Marcus. The house was a monument to vanity, marble floors that echoed when you walked, chandeliers that cost more than most people earn in a decade. The air smelled of pine needles, roasted duck, and old money. Arthur stood by the entrance, brushing snow off a coat that had seen better days. He wasn't late, but the conversation stopped the moment he walked in. That specific kind of silence, the silence that says, "Oh, he's here." Uncle Marcus, a man whose stomach entered the room 3 seconds before the rest of him, held a crystal glass of scotch and didn't even turn his head. "Check your shoes, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice booming across the foyer. "We just had the floors redone. Italian marble, don't track mud on it." Arthur froze. He looked down. His shoes were clean. He had spent 10 minutes outside wiping them on the mat specifically to avoid this moment. But it didn't matter. The command wasn't about hygiene, it was about dominance. It was about reminding everyone in the room who the master was and who the servant was. Arthur quietly apologized, an apology he didn't owe, and moved to the edge of the room. He was 32 years old, but in this house he was perpetually 7. He watched his cousins, Lucas and Sarah, laughing by the fireplace. Lucas was bragging about his new startup, a tech venture funded entirely by his father's money. Sarah was complaining about the service in Bali. They glanced at Arthur, gave a tight, pitiful smile, and turned their backs. They didn't offer him a drink. They didn't ask him how he was. Why would they? In their minds, Arthur's life was a static image of mediocrity. He worked odd jobs. He drove a beat-up sedan. He lived in a small apartment on the wrong side of town. He was the poor relative. But here is the secret that Arthur carried in his chest like a burning coal. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. While Lucas was burning through venture capital on flashy marketing parties, and while Uncle Marcus was leveraging his assets to buy a 3rd vacation home, Arthur was building. He wasn't building loud, he was building deep. For 5 years, Arthur had been working nights, not sleeping, barely eating. He was a self-taught coder, a ghost developer for some of the most secure blockchain infrastructures in the world. He lived on rice and beans not because he had to, but because every single dollar he made was being reinvested into a proprietary algorithm he had designed. He was sitting on a digital goldmine, but he hadn't cashed out. Not yet. He was waiting for the patent to clear. He was waiting for the right buyer. He was playing the long game in a room full of people playing for short-term applause. Dinner was served. The table was a battlefield disguised as a meal. Arthur was seated, predictably, between his deaf gratin and an empty chair. The conversation flowed towards the economy. "It's a shark tank out there," Uncle Marcus proclaimed, stabbing a piece of steak. "You have to be a killer. You have to show strength. If you don't have assets, you don't have a voice. Isn't that right, Arthur?" The table went quiet. The spotlight turned to Arthur, harsh and unforgiving. Marcus smiled, a predator toying with a mouse. "How's the ... What is it you do again?" "Deliveries, fixing computers." Arthur looked up from his plate. His eyes were calm, unsettlingly calm. "I'm in software, Uncle Marcus's development." A ripple of laughter went around the table. Lucas snorted into his wine. "Development? Arthur, installing an antivirus on Mrs. Higgins' laptop isn't development. Real development takes capital, it takes vision." Arthur didn't blink. "I'll keep that in mind." "Lucas." Marcus leaned forward. Look, son, we love you, your family, but let's be realistic. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to serve. If you need money for rent again this month, just ask your aunt. We don't want you on the street. It looks bad for us. That was the moment. The moment the air pressure in the room shifted, though only Arthur felt it. The rent money comment was a fabrication. Arthur hadn't asked for money in 10 years, but facts didn't matter to Marcus. The narrative mattered. By painting Arthur as a beggar, Marcus elevated himself to a savior. Arthur gripped his fork beneath the table until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream. He wanted to pull out his phone and show them the bank balance that was currently pending transfer, some that could buy this house 3 times over. But he didn't. This is the psychology of the comeback. True power requires discipline. If you reveal your hand too early, you lose the advantage, you lose the lesson. So Arthur swallowed the insult. He nodded. Thank you, uncle, I'm fine. The night dragged on. As Arthur left, walking out into the cold December air, he looked back at the glowing windows of the mansion. He saw them inside, warm, drunk, on their own self-importance. They thought they were the kings of the world. They didn't realize the world was changing, and they were dinosaurs staring at a meteor. Arthur got into his rusted car, turned the key, and whispered to the empty dashboard, "Checkmate." 3 years passed. In the world of business, 3 years is an eternity. It is enough time for empires to rise and for fortresses to crumble. The economy took a sharp turn. The real estate bubble that Uncle Marcus had leveraged his life on burst with a violent pop. The tech startup that Lucas had founded, built on hype and zero substance, imploded amidst lawsuits and fraud allegations. The family's fortune, which seemed as solid as the Italian marble floors, turned out to be built on sand. It began with whispers, then came the panic. Uncle Marcus was selling the boats, then the vacation homes, then came the liens on the main estate. The family gathering that year wasn't a party. It was a funeral for their lifestyle. They gathered in the same living room, but the fire was dim, and the expensive scotch was replaced by cheap brandy. The air didn't smell of pine, it smelled of fear. "We need a bridge loan," Marcus said, his face gray and aged, the arrogance stripped away to reveal a frightened old man. "Just until the market turns." Lucas shook his head in his hands. "No bank will touch us, Dad. Our credit is shot. The investors want their money back by Monday, or they seize the assets. They seize the house." Silence, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then, the doorbell rang. They weren't expecting anyone. The staff had been let go months ago. Marcus stood up heavily, annoyed and fearful. Who is bothering us now? Probably a process server. He walked to the door and swung it open, ready to yell. But the words died in his throat. Parked in the driveway was not a police cruiser and not a delivery truck. It was a matte black luxury sedan, understated but unmistakably expensive. A driver stood by the door, but the man walking up the steps didn't need a driver to open the door for him. He wore a suit that fit perfectly tailored dark navy, the kind of fabric that whispers wealth rather than shouting it. He looked healthier, stronger. He carried himself with a kinetic energy, a sharpness that cut through the gloom of the evening. It was Arthur. Marcus blinked, his brain struggling to process the image. This didn't fit the pattern. This didn't fit the hierarchy. "Arthur," he stammered. What are you doing here? We're not having a party. This isn't a good time." "I know," Arthur said. His voice was different. It was deeper, resonant, the voice of a man who is used to being listened to. "I'm not here for a party, Marcus. I'm here for the meeting." "What meeting?" "The liquidation meeting," Arthur said calmly, stepping past his uncle into the foyer. He didn't wipe his feet. He didn't look down at the marble. He walked straight into the living room. The family looked up. Lucas's jaw dropped. Sarah squinted, confused. "Arthur, is that ... Is that an Armani suit?" Arthur ignored the question. He walked to the head of the table Marcus's seat and placed a leather folder on the wood. He remained standing. "I heard about the liquidity crisis," Arthur said, addressing the room. "I heard about the failed IPO, Lucas, and the over-leveraged properties." "Marcus, how do you know about that?" Marcus snapped, rushing into the room, his face red. "These are private family matters. You have no business. I have business, because I am the one buying the debt," Arthur interrupted. The volume of his voice didn't rise, but the authority in it silenced the room instantly. "Excuse me." Lucas laughed, a nervous, hysterical sound. "You, buying the debt, Arthur. The debt is $4 million. You fix computers." Arthur opened the folder. He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a bank draft, a certified proof of funds. The number on the paper had 7 zeros. Lucas looked at the paper. He went pale. He looked up at Arthur, then back at the paper. This is real. How the algorithm, that rumors about the ghost coder in the valley, that was you. While you were playing CEO, Lucas, I was building the infrastructure you were trying to run on, Arthur said. He turned to Marcus. I bought the note from the bank this morning. They were going to foreclose on Tuesday. I stopped them. Marcus collapsed into a chair. The dynamic of the room, the hierarchy that had existed for decades, shattered instantly. The poor relative was now the owner of the roof over their heads. The psychological shift was violent. You could see it in their eyes, the cognitive dissonance. They couldn't reconcile the Arthur they mocked with the Titan standing before them. Marcus whispered, "Why save us? After how we treated you, are you here to kick us out, to rub it in?" Arthur looked around the room. He looked at the cold fireplace. He looked at the cousins who had ignored him. He looked at the uncle who had belittled him. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In his head, he had screamed at them. He had thrown them out into the snow. He had made them beg. But now that he was here, now that he held the power, he realized something profound. The poor relative is only poor if he accepts their currency. Their currency was status, judgment, and cruelty. If he used his power to be cruel, he would just be Marcus with more money. The comeback wasn't about revenge. It was about transcendence. "I'm not here to kick you out," Arthur said quietly. "I'm keeping the house. You can stay here until you get back on your feet, but the deed stays in my name." He leaned in, placing his hands on the table, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. "But there is one condition, one rule that will change in this house." "Anything," Marcus breathed. "Nobody sits in the corner anymore," Arthur said, "and nobody is judged by the size of their wallet. You underestimated me because you looked at my shoes instead of my eyes. You looked at my car instead of my character. You made the fatal mistake of thinking that wealth is loud. Real wealth is quiet. Real power is control. And real family doesn't require a bank statement to be treated with dignity." Arthur buttoned his jacket. "I've paid the arrears. The heat will be back on in an hour. Lucas, if you want a job, I need junior developers. You'll start at the bottom. You'll learn to code. No fancy titles, just work. If you're willing to do that, show up at my office on Monday. If not, good luck." Arthur turned and walked to the door. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of awe, the silence of respect. As he reached the door, Marcus called out, his voice trembling, "Arthur, ... stay for dinner please." Arthur paused. He looked back at the table, at the people who shared his blood but not his spirit. He smiled, not with malice, but with closure. "No thank you, Marcus. I have a reservation, but enjoy the house. It really is beautiful." The door closed. The psychology of the comeback is not about the money, it is about the shift in reality. When you underestimate the poor relative, you are betting against the human spirit. You are assuming that current circumstances dictate future potential. Arthur drove away in the silence of his car, leaving the noise of his family behind. He realized that for years, he had wanted a seat at their table. But the moment he bought the table, he realized he never needed to sit there at all. Don't let them break you. Let them ignore you. Let them mock you. Let them underestimate you. Because while they are talking, you are building. And the day will come when their noise will be drowned out by your results. That is the fatal mistake. And that is your victory.